Hello, and today in this episode, I will be talking about the difference between the culture of compliance in standard corporate environment and conscious enterprise settings. So what's the difference between the two in terms of their corporate culture, in terms of their values and what have you? So let's start with the fact that leadership in small and medium-sized companies is an entirely different thing. It's the free spirit of entrepreneurship, which requires the kind of a leadership that's based on resolve, drive, mental and psychological resilience needed to have the kind of a determination to be able to deliver on the promise and tackle the challenges as they come. Well, that's definitely a bit of a different approach to standard sterile kind of corporate environment, which is far more complex and challenging. So therefore, to rein in the free spirit, it would be a completely different undertaking. So, but when it comes to a real conscious leader who is driving this conscious enterprise, it's all based on, first and foremost, on his creativity, on his imagination, this ability to identify market opportunities and look at the solutions from various perspectives, because making a mistake could be quite costly. And therefore, you've got to really lead the people, empower them to allow them to flourish and shine in your own environment. And yes, I mean, that's difficult. That's definitely, we're talking about the kind of traits of character and values that are out of the ordinary, because you've got to plug in certain gaping holes like, lousy childhood, rotten upbringing, sketchy education. Overall, I mean, the human element, you've got to overcompensate for that. And that's definitely not the case when you have to look at the fact that reducing people to numbers, that's not the right approach. It could be possible in a very complex environment in the corporate world, but at the same time, driving a company, you're working closely with a lot of people whose potential largely depends on how you structure your work with them, and whether you have the potential to lead, inspire, and motivate your employees, and at the same time have enough room to establish the kind of a trust and empathy that, to compensate for certain failings with your emotional and spiritual intelligence. And that, for a conscious enterprise is key, because you're going to come from the stated values. You're going to embrace your core values and act on them to make sure you can inspire your people, and you can give them meaning to come to work every day. So that's going to be shared not necessarily just by employees alone, but also by a larger stakeholder community and people like partners and employees and everybody involved in their supply chain or other providers and stuff. So if everyone is included in this environment and feels appreciated, that sets the tone for everyone and provides a kind of example that's really key. Because without it, it will be very difficult, just to display that selfish leadership and ethical stewardship if it's not supported by the entire organization. It's not shared. Setting the tone for this communication with your people, with your suppliers and distributors, what have you, sustains that conscious culture. Now that is like using different terminology in the corporate environment, when you do have to work with your supply chain to make sure you can eradicate the third-party risks and what have you, and at the same time this whole concept and the premise of enlightened leadership or conscious leadership is normally distilled in a bit of like a dry verbiage, You just have to communicate, the culture of ethics and compliance from the top, and even the terminology, the culture of compliance over the conscious culture. It does lack that sort of inspiration that's normally needed to establish this communication and the idea of sharing with the people who are working with you. So yeah, but at the same time, you could say the complexity of a larger corporate kind of like calls in, for a different structure of how it's done, because the leadership is so far out that they cannot really communicate with the people on the ground. So that being said, definitely the larger the company, the more prescribed are the policies and procedures and what have you to ensure the kind of a legalistic structure, but at the same time, the training and communicating about maintaining the culture of respect and dignity, and at the same time eradicating any misdeeds, misconduct, and all of that through the outsourced independent provider that kind of compensates for that. But this is loosely said, so this is what the difference is, and I will talk about it some more in other episodes, so stay tuned.